As an FBI special agent was my dream job. My whistleblowing was apolitical and in the spirit of upholding my oath. Nonetheless, the FBI cynically elected to close ranks and attack the messenger.
The FBI will crush you. This government will crush you and your family if you try to expose the truth about things that they are doing that are wrong. We are all examples of that.
Joining us now are Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, fellas.
FBI whistleblowers Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle both join us now. Gentlemen, so glad to have you on the program. Thank you for your testimony.
We need more folks like you, and I'm sure more people are going to be from your background are going to be giving you guys more intel as you're sharing that with the rest of us. We can kind of see that this is becoming normal for them to be held accountable, because I think especially an institution that we pay their salaries, they need to be held accountable.
I think a lot of people do share our beliefs and convictions. I think they just aren't at the point that Steve and I and others have gotten to. They're too afraid.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on PBD Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How big is that bloody flag that Steve's got? It's the stole wall of his house. Lots of love, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle. Thank you for being with us this morning. More importantly, thank you for speaking out. We appreciate it.
You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Thursday morning, 0830 on the Eastern Seaboard. We are live streaming to you on Rumble. Rumble.com/AmRadPod is where you can always find us on Tuesday and Thursday at 8:30 Eastern Time and noontime Eastern on Saturday. Grateful to have you along for the ride in the chat, live and lively. Whoever you are, wherever you are, or if you miss us live, whenever you are, we're grateful. Make sure that you smash the thumbs up and follow the program. And if you subscribe to the audio format on iTunes and Spotify and iHeart, it will give you the automatic updates. Please remember to drop us a 5-star rating there so we can continue to trick the algorithm into sharing the American Radicals Podcast with more people. We're trying to grow here, folks. Can you throw us a freaking bone? It is a Thursday. The 59-minute rule is in effect. Today's show is about vulnerability. We're calling it vulnerable because everyone in all of the different stories that we're going to get into, there's an element of being at risk, endangered in a certain way. It's going to range from our favorite FBI entrapment to other matters like the criminal justice system in general, going after people who they shouldn't. Police officers who could be vulnerable to being attacked when they are physically attacked and then afterwards. And then also the most vulnerable amongst us, the unborn. We're going to get to all of that. And I'm really excited to have Garrett along for the ride, because when we dunk on the FBI, I can do it at monologue, but it's way more fun because two is company. How are you doing today at GOB Actual?
Doing good, Steve. Doing good. I like this idea, this vulnerable idea, because there's so much, and it'll probably be like a lot to go through with each example we get into, especially with our background. I would allude to our police background more than our FBI background when it comes to some of these topics, because of what law enforcement officers, or as we like to call them, the real police, deal with on essentially a daily basis, where it seems like federal law enforcement is weaponized against vulnerable people, which we'll get into. Standard or real police law enforcement typically try to respond in a way where they can help, or at least get these people some type of treatment. Doesn't always go that way, but yeah, interesting times in the alleged land of the free.
The first one we're going to spend the lion's share on is a story that you found with a vulnerable person who the FBI got when they're at their most vulnerable. So helmet sticker to you for finding it. I'm normally the one who's mining for these stories, but this one you brought to my attention, and very much like the story that I covered when I went solo a week ago, was talking about that guy who was basically encouraged to join the army. This is probably one of the more egregious examples. And you've been able to find some more that we're going to have to dig into in future episodes and expose them, because they're just egregious and disgusting and despicable. Everyone in them a pox upon your house. But to set it up, we have to, as always, because hopefully we are growing, we might have a new listener or two, the FBI playbook. The FBI playbook for entrapment, for counterterrorism, very briefly, is identify a vulnerable person, someone who might be emotionally disturbed, could be indigent, lonely, just down on their luck, small-time criminal, and increasingly juvenile, under the age of 18. And you find them with the snitch, the confidential human source, who is only paid by the FBI for being productive. Productive meaning bringing us some fresh meat, not putting the hand on that person's shoulder and saying, hey, you're kind of going down a bad path here. You might be becoming radicalized. Why don't you course correct? That doesn't bode well for the FBI's stats. So they just bring in the fresh meat. And then the FBI moves on to the next step, and they introduce the undercover asset, be it in person or online. And that's when they get that vulnerable person who is not predisposed to do anything wrong. They might have some bad ideology or some questionable judgment, but they're not capable. They get them to make their worst decision, and then they spring the trap. They say, well, you were planning on doing it, even though the entire time you were incapable of doing it. There was no risk of it because we were standing here. And the last thing I'll add is they don't care about collateral damage. They do take risks because these are vulnerable people. They might just fly off the handle every now and then. You never know. You can't have them within arm's reach at all times. That's not really taken into consideration. And I think that's also worth bringing. All of that for this guy, which we have the article, and then, as in true American radicals fashion, I did bring receipts because I went and got the court documents. But first, to the article. It comes from Headline USA, which is rapidly about to become one of my favorite must-go-to websites, because that's where you've been mining for these stories here. The title is FBI Sting Nabs 21-year-old schizophrenic who talked to undercover agent for 5 years. Before we begin, Garrett, any thoughts getting into that?
I mean, like, this is what is so crazy, and I think people don't really understand, or maybe we're just not made aware of it enough. But even us with our backgrounds, that's just shocking to me. 5 years? You okay, so at what point is it law enforcement grooming? Because that's certainly what this appears to be right off the bat when you tell us they've been at it for 5 years trying to get this guy to commit a terrorism. It took you 5 years to push him over the edge?
Well, looking at the court documents, and I think we need to do that before we even get into the details. There's a couple things that we need to throw out about, I think, are really revealing about our ex-girlfriend at the FBI. So typically when it comes to court documents, which I might as well just throw up right now, they will black out the agent, because they're a secret agent, their identity, right?
Right, yeah.
You'll be able to find out about their background and maybe put it together if you have some people on the inside who give us a name here or there, which we'd able to do on occasion. But increasingly, they're actually putting their names on there, and it's a little difficult to read here. So I'll just let you know. Your agent, your affiant on this document his name is Jonathan Evans. His name is there, his signature is there, and you find out he's been with the Bureau since 2022.
But wait a
So
second,
the
Steve.
case predates him. I think the old trusty agents who might have just a smidgen of belief in the Constitution, the oath that they once swore, said, this is garbage and I'm getting off of it. Whereas the person who came in 2022 is an ideologue, and they're going to go along with anything that our ex-girlfriend says to do. Because as you read through here, you find out that Jonathan Evans, although the affiant, joined the FBI in 2022, this case goes all the way back to 2019. And actually, our bad guy here, our vulnerable person, his name is Michael Sam TK, Tango Echo Echo Kilo Alpha Yankee Echo, but we're just going to call him Mike. Mike was born in August of 2003. So if this was going on in September of 2019, that would make him how old, Garrett?
16 roughly.
So the FBI was investigating a 16-year-old. Huh. Seems
Wow.
like a vulnerable age. Seems like somebody who might be possibly able to affect change in their lives if they have all their wits about them, because they're more suggestible at age 16. I mean, an FBI agent might actually be able to put his hand around that guy's shoulder and say, "Hey, I'd love to have you on my team one day. Come work
Mhm.
for Uncle Sam," right? But they didn't do that. So Sam made documented threats of violence against his peers, his classmates, I presume, uh, since at least September of 2019. And he was the subject of an emergency petition. Can you break down, Garrett, what is a Baker Act?
Yeah, so this goes kind of to what I was talking about initially with our background in law enforcement, because cops are getting this type of call all the time because some type of threats made at the in your high school class, or maybe even a teenager just tells his parents or puts it on Snapchat that they're suicidal or whatever the case may be, or want to harm others. And then, the logical next step seems to be more and more call the police. So the police show up, and you do basically some initial questioning of the parents and of the child. And at least in my experience, sometimes you would call over to like the county mental health facility and say, hey, this is what I got, this is what they said. I think there's criteria to bring this person in for a mandatory. Here in Wisconsin, it's a 3-day hold, but it varies from state to state to some degree. But by and large, if there's if criteria is met, so if you have a reasonable belief that this person does intend or pose an actual threat of violence to themselves or another, the state can intervene, the government can intervene and take them into custody. And the whole point of it is to try to get them actual help so that they don't hurt themselves or someone else.
And according to the affidavit here, that happened in October of 2019.
So way back
October?
in the beginning of it.
Yes, immediately. And you know that it was way back in the beginning because the next paragraph, which they number in these documents, the very next paragraph is when the FBI learned of Mike in December, 2 months later, when the FBI was, quote, made aware of a social media account operated by Mike expressing extremist Islamist ideology. How were they made aware of it, pray tell?
Mm. Most likely a classmate or someone, or maybe even an OCE, an online undercover, or a CHS somehow came across the social media post and made a report.
So they were made aware of it, and we don't know how in December of 2019. But shortly thereafter, Mike began interacting with an online covert employee,
Dun dun dun.
with a 16-year-old. They know he's 16. They have the evidence. They can get his medical records. They can get his criminal history. That's all going to be documented by the local police department. They know he's been institutionalized. This is from the very beginning. They cannot claim that they did not know. But wait, it gets worse. Flash forward to the next month, January of 2020. The FBI spoke to Mike and his parents and conducted a consensual search of his phone and laptop.
Mm,
This is very out in the open, right? And
yeah.
this is the point where you do have the candid conversation. You might be becoming radicalized. We want good things for you. We're not telling you what decision to make, but we are the consequence if you choose wrong. That's the end of Watch opening monologue that I really like from Jake Gyllenhaal. He says, "I'm a consequence." It's
Hmm.
pretty effective.
Yep.
Around this same time, Mike was the subject of another emergency petition. So twice now he's been Baker acted within 2 months. So clearly he's off his rocker. And any trained investigator would know that, which means that they took that information, imbibed it, and said, we got one on the hook here. We got a good one.
Hmm.
The only problem is he's still 16 years old. So a month later, Mike was interviewed again by the FBI at his home, and his parents were there. Mike admitted being in contact with fighters and said that at times he planned to become a fighter in an overseas location. Mike told the agents his desire to go overseas as a fighter had waned, though, because he felt like he might be being used by the people online. You mean the people online that work for the FBI? Because
Exactly.
those are the only people using you right now. And if you read in the very intro of this charging document, they say who is Al Qaeda and who is ISIS. He doesn't even know who he's going to align with. And ISIS and Al Qaeda don't get along really well.
Right.
He's just a crazy person who's heard of these organizations and says, "Oh, I'm just going to latch on to anything." If
Mhm.
you had told him about Boko Haram, he'd be like, "Oh, that sounds good to me."
Right. And it goes to what you talked about right at the outset of presenting this case. He's a young, vulnerable, impressionable kid. And instead of an FBI agent who becomes aware of this through whatever mechanism, let's even say it's a nefarious mechanism like an OCE right off the bat. I tend to think that it was probably some type of Guardian report, which for newer listeners, that's the FBI's basically intake system. Instead of calling dispatch, you go on FBI.gov and you can make a tip, or you can call their 24-hour a day number and report something that way. And that's how these things get disseminated out into the field. That's what I'm going to think happened here. I don't know for sure, but let's say it was an undercover, a responsible FBI agent who understands their oath, who understands their position, who understands the power that they have. You mentioned End of Watch in that beginning scene. I also that's like one of my favorite cop movies, even though it can get cheesy with some of the camcording and whatnot. But that beginning is actually a proper exposition of Romans 13, where it says that the government does not bear the sword in vain, and it is supposed to be a consequence to bad behavior. And we've talked about that ad nauseum. But here we are again, where instead of taking and look, whether you have mental illness or not, this is concerning behavior, which that's why the dude got Baker acted twice within like the first 6 months of this case. And instead of an FBI agent saying, "Hey, instead of you joining Boko Haram or ISIS or Al Qaeda, and you're grabbing onto these fanciful ideas that you're finding in the dark corners of the internet, why don't you come down to the FBI office and we'll show you how the good guys do it, quote unquote, the good guys." Because imagine that, Steve, if you just run the kid through some scenarios with some of the sim rounds, and shoot don't shoot scenarios, or just turn the red and blue lights on, or introduce them to one of your friends who's on SWAT and say, "Oh, look at all the cool gear we have. Let's get you geared on a different path, kid. And you know what? Here's my business card. And if you're getting bullied at school or whatever the case may be, give me a call." Man, it's crazy to me that most people in the FBI don't even think that way. It's appalling, and quite frankly, it should be frightening to people that instead of having quote unquote public servants in a position who are willing to do that thing that I just explained, instead it's nope, I'm a hammer, and this kid's 16, and we're gonna groom him until he's an adult, and then groom him for a couple more years, and then we'll pull the plug and arrest him for a terrorism.
And we know that nothing happened for a couple of years because after the portion that I just read you about, where the conversation happened, nothing, no further information. The next paragraph is 2+ years later. So did they close the case out? Did they resume it? Well, why would you resume it? Did something new happen? No. They were continuing to communicate online with this guy for 2 years, waiting for him to turn 18. A vulnerable person. And maybe the blue lights wouldn't do anything. Maybe he's just so crazy. He's so retarded in one way or another. He's got some emotional disturbance that is so bad that frankly he needs to be institutionalized.
Mhm.
We
And
need to
that
make
very
asylums
well,
great again,
yeah,
right?
and very well could be the case here.
But we will go back to what the affiant tells us, Special Agent Evans, secret agent. July 19, 2022, so 2.5 years later, the police responded to an elementary school in Columbia, Maryland, regarding a male subject in the parking lot wearing a black face mask and holding a large fixed blade knife. The individual was identified as Mike.
Hmm.
So he's now an adult holding a large kitchen knife in a elementary school parking lot. Not the activities of someone who's cold and calculating like a terrorist plotter, right? Just a crazy person and dangerous, right? Following the incident, he was arrested. And then this is where the fail happens in the criminal justice system. Um, we don't make asylums great again. We don't even put you in jail. He got probation for that. He was put on probation and supervised release for a few years. It would go actually until September of 2025. It was basically like a 4-year probation. Well, we go 6 months ahead, and now we're in March of 2023, March and April. Mike had multiple conversations with a female undercover officer. UCO. Is that an FBI term, Garrett?
It is not.
So it seems like they might have a joint terrorism task force
How about
or
that?
be leaning on local assets from local agencies. And they do what is called a honey trap. You care to take this one or should I?
Well, it reminds me. We talked about it just the other day with Trevor Aronson and how it really shouldn't matter the type of case, whether it's an Antifa or BLM type of case or a J6 type of case or any in between. The methods of the playbook are wrong. And in Trevor Aronson's season 1 of Alphabet Boys, there was a honey trap. There was an undercover officer. I think she was Colorado Springs or something to that effect.
Yes.
And she infiltrates this group that the FBI is investigating. But
She had a noteworthy bust size to the point where it was a running joke, apparently, amongst everyone. Like
Mhm.
even the police officers that were on the squad were saying, like, yep, there she is. And
And
they did that to get young, horny men to go agree to go do a terrorism or
exactly
make
right.
an illegal gun purchase
Exactly.
because they're 18 and they're idiots. And this guy is actually schizophrenic, diagnosed, but he's still 18. And I'm sure that she batted her eyes at him in a verbal fashion online
Mhm.
and did so, I believe, for over a year. Continued to poke and prod and say how they're going to get married and they're going to go overseas and do a terrorism, or maybe we'll do a terrorism here. Well, but first, we're going to have to get married, of course, right? A year later, this case has now gone from 2019 to 2024,
Dude.
which would be 6 fiscal years.
And
6 fiscal years, which they are dragging this bad boy out.
And you know what? Well, you do know because you allude to this all the time as well. It touches on protected disclosures that you and I both made independently of one another because we didn't know each other back then. Yet you and I both blew the whistle on the FBI's statistical padding or their IPM system, the integrated program management, where and especially in the JTTF world, the Joint Terrorism Task Force world, you got to keep cases open. You got to keep bringing cases because that's where we get our funding. And oh, have you done this, that, or the other thing? To I'm not going to let you close the case, as a boss would say. I'm not going to let you close it until you do X, Y, and Z, and fill in the blanks and perpetuate the case for year after year after year after year. What else can we do? Oh, let's get the female undercover officer who's on the task force to start poking this guy. And maybe that'll do the trick. Well, it did in this case. It also makes me think, unless you want to touch on that, I have something I want to pop up here.
No, I'm ready to move to the next thing where there's yet another fail because it gets worse.
Go ahead. I've got something. I'll hold it
So
in reserve.
a year of this goes back and forth, and now it takes us to 2024. And that's when Mike decides to go and, according to the FBI, do training. Training at a gun range, which is Second Amendment much, bro. Now, I don't know the conditions of your probation. Are you allowed to go and shoot at a range if it's not your gun? He had to buy ammunition, so I presume that's actually illegal. And then it appeared from the conversations that he was trying to buy a firearm. Again, a violation of probation. Mike is on probation. Oh, and by the way, we have to throw in the obligatory picture of him with the gun, right?
Oh,
But that's
have to.
not bad enough. We got to go with him where he's shooting it, right? So for those watching, you get that pleasurable appearance. But he's in violation of his probation, and he's a vile, vicious wannabe terrorist right now. We don't have enough to go and kick in his door quite yet, but you know what would probably be the prudent thing to do if you're actually interested in public safety and protecting national security? Violate his probation and get him incarcerated.
There you go.
They talked to his probation officer and she said, yeah, he's been in accordance. There've been no problems. Well, we verified, ma'am, that he's violated, but we didn't violate him. And actually, they waited another 5 months to wait for him to buy his airline ticket, go to the Baltimore International Airport, make it through security, and that's when they got him.
Which, I mean, it should be
But,
obvious that
last thing, they got him October 14th, just after the fiscal year crossed, so they could tick off a 7th fiscal year on this investigation.
crazy. And now it's going to stay open too. That case will stay open until
Oh, for at least another year. They'll
yeah.
get it to at least, I mean, because it's so early in this fiscal year, if it's another year, it would actually be almost have to be almost 2 full years to get it to a third additional one.
Mhm.
It very well may, but you're gonna get to 8 fiscal years for a 16-year-old paranoid schizophrenic that you're gonna put him in prison for, what, 15 years? He'll be out by the time he's 36, and I'm sure he will not be completely radicalized at that point.
Right. Like, oh, man, it's so ridiculous. And it should be at a minimum prima facie evidence that the FBI knew he wasn't really dangerous and that they knew if they would have interceded in a different way that he never would have had to even be arrested for. And let me guess, Steve, because I didn't look, but let me guess that one of the charges was providing material support to a designated foreign terrorist organization. Am I right about that?
Oh, you are right, sir. You are right.
Of course I am. And so,
Attempting to provide material support and resources to a designated foreign terrorist organization, namely ISIS.
of course. And so, for those who aren't aware, I'm going to pop this up here. This is from Cornell Law School. They've got the whole federal code available there. It's 18 USC 2339B, providing material support or resources are designated to a designated foreign terrorist organization. In the FBI, in the Joint Terrorism Task Force world, this is your meal ticket. If you can get a material support charge, you're good. Like, you're looked at as you got what they like to call in the FBI a career case.
Career case. I mean, you do not have to do anything for the rest of your life in the FBI, particularly if you're a female agent. Sorry, not sorry, I'll say it. If you're a female agent and you accomplish anything close to this, especially in national security, you don't have to work ever again.
Yep. You're going to be going all around to different field offices and back to Quantico. And
Brief your case. I mean, and the best achievement that you can get as a female agent, and I've been in contact with some agents on the inside, and they say it's gotten far worse. This is why, if there is a change at the very top of the executive branch in a couple of months, and we don't know if that's going to happen or not, it has to be completely eradicated and fumigated, because they have brought in the last 4 years all these new people that are ideological fellow travelers, to the point where I've learned that they are insisting, female agents, on going to meet police chiefs and demanding that the police chief address them as special agent last name, as opposed to, hi, I'm Steve, how you doing?
dude, and that's what I just was going to say. How many times did you ever introduce yourself to anybody and say, I'm special agent friend? I
would
always
do it with
was,
a Die Hard reference and then laugh.
yeah. What I don't know if I've ever talked about this. I may have, but with as one of my additional hats, I was the assistant weapons of mass destruction coordinator for the Wichita RA, and I went and did some training. Like, I created it all myself, a PowerPoint and some training based off of the FBI's program for WMD. And I went and I would provide this training to fire departments, police departments. And the main one I'm thinking of was like a training that the Wichita Fire Department was running, where I went and I presented this. And guess what my very first slide was, Steve? It was that clip from Die Hard, because it's funny. And that is the idea that many have of the FBI. And so I wanted to start off with a joke, and I said, I'm not that guy. My name's Garrett. I got some business cards up here. Call me anytime if you think we're needed, whatever. And then I went through the next couple hours of my presentation. But to actually have these people in the FBI who you're demanding a police chief call you special agent so and so, like,
When
it's
you're
just ridiculous.
on probation out of the academy and he's a chief of police.
Mm-hmm.
No respect at all. But,
Right.
if you're a brand new agent, you get that career case, you're talking about someone who can sit around for 20 years making
Mm-hmm.
6 figures and bring nothing to the
Nothing
table.
else ever again because they got their material support charge.
All right. Ready to pivot? We're going to go to some other ones that are more in the news.
I want to pop one more thing up here because it's I think it's extremely relevant because we talk about these cases and we will in the coming episodes with other examples. It seems like schizophrenia is a big one for the FBI, probably because those people are so unstable that then they become a target instead of someone that the government tries to actually help. But I think this is relevant because of the timing of this case, combined with what we learned. So they opened the case in 2019 when this guy is 16 years old, and then fast forward to now, all these years later, 2024, they arrest him. But look what happened in 2020 because we had that 2-year lull, at least in the affidavit. So this is from The Guardian. It's old. It's 4 years old. The headline says FBI lacks strategy for handling tips on people with mental health problems. Oh, really? You don't think? How about that? They lack a strategy. And it says report finds FBI has problems with assessing whether individuals with mental health problems pose legitimate threats. I mean, doesn't that sound like what we've just been talking about for like a half an hour or more?
Sounds like accidental honesty.
And what's really frustrating about it is because it ties in the inspector general, which just in regards to whistleblowing, we know that they have been found lacking. Well, the same here. It says the FBI must do better handling tips and leads about people who may carry out violent acts, including assessing whether individuals with mental health problems pose legitimate threats to national security, according to a new report by a Justice Department watchdog. Are they really a watchdog, though, Steve? I would quibble with the verbiage here at The Guardian.
I don't think Mike Horowitz is a watchdog at all. I think he's
Right.
more of a chihuahua at best.
Mm-hmm. It goes on. It says the report from the Inspector General's office identifies what it says are weaknesses and inconsistencies in how the FBI evaluates tips on homegrown violent extremists, people who are motivated by jihadist ideology and are operating in the U.S. independent of foreign terrorist organizations. The report underscores the FBI's challenges in preventing violence from people whose actions and ideology may be disturbing without violating federal law. Those difficulties attracted fresh scrutiny in recent years after several people the FBI once investigated but did not arrest because they had not broken the law later went on to commit acts, including the gunman in the 2016 Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando.
Oh,
I know.
do we have to go to Orlando? Which wasn't a attack for religious reasons. It was just a crazy person. And his father was a snitch for the FBI, who
Right.
they had legitimate cases on him. And they purposely did not arrest him at the request of his father because his father was so darn productive at finding people to entrap.
Mm-hmm.
And he went to Disney first and then saw, oh, wait, the Mickey Mouse police are for real.
Yep.
And then went to a different nightclub and thought, oh, you know what? There's a parking garage I have to use. So people are going to see me approaching with my long gun. That's no good. So then he went to the third choice, which happened to be the Pulse nightclub. It had nothing to do with it being a gay nightclub. And it's just a common mistake that the media propped up. And then, oh, by the way, they got his wife, who was a double-digit IQ, verifiable, after interrogating her for 11 hours, to admit to driving him when she had no license and never driven him before. The FBI. Another Trevor Aronson piece on that. His podcast on the Pulse nightclub is definitely worth a listen, as is the American Radicals podcast. Listen to us first, then Trevor. Trevor, I love you, but come on, self-serving. Give us a thumbs up if you haven't already, guys. This is just a reminder, and follow the program. We're trying to grow here. Ready to pivot? let's go to a little bit more newsworthy, not 4-year-old guardians, and not entrapments, which we will have to bring about maybe like a episodic version of until the foreseeable future when we can't come up with one, which I don't know, maybe after the election when the FBI goes away, but who knows? This is a video. This is about the Daniel Penny trial, which is happening and is being covered. This was this Marine who was in the subway car, and then there was this homeless, crazy person who was accosting the passengers there, threatened violence against them. He put him in a restraint, and then excited delirium, or for whatever reason, he perishes. How is this vulnerable? Well, it seems to me like everybody is vulnerable, but before we do that, let's just launch off because his trial is about to begin this week. They already did the jury selection, and New York just can't wait to put Marines and Good Samaritans in prison. Let's give this one a play.
The trial of the man charged in the chokehold death of 30-year-old Jordan Neely on a subway train is about to get underway.
We want to go to Good Day's Briella Tomasetti. She is outside Manhattan Criminal Court, where jury selection is set to begin today. Briella, good morning.
Yeah, Dan and Tashani, good morning to both of you. So this trial is expected to last between 4 and 6 weeks. A judge, though, denied Daniel Penny's bid to dismiss the case earlier this year. A case, by the way, that has put a major spotlight on race and inequities in the justice system. The trial of Daniel Penny, the now 25-year-old Marine veteran charged in the chokehold death of Jordan Neely, is set to begin today with jury selection. Penny has pleaded not guilty to second-degree manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide in connection with Neely's death. Penny is accused of recklessly causing Neely's death in a Manhattan subway car on May 1st of last year. He was captured on video putting 30-year-old Neely in a chokehold during an apparent mental breakdown. Witnesses say Neely had been acting erratically and shouting at passengers when Penny moved to restrain him. Neely lost consciousness during the struggle and later died. The medical examiner's office ruled his death a homicide caused by compression of the neck.
All right, I don't want to see the street communists protesting for a guy that they have no connection to at all. I love the media saying it's a chokehold, which it isn't. But to the topic at hand today, Garrett, vulnerable. So the guy who died was a vulnerable person.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was probably rendered vulnerable by his support network around him, because why was he homeless? All the people that were saying, "Oh, he was just a known commodity in the subway, and we loved him so much." Well, why weren't you there to pick him up?
Mm-hmm.
And he was definitely the type that would probably be entrapped by the FBI if they had the ability to do it.
Oh, no
Emotionally
doubt.
disturbed. And now Daniel Penny, who was in that situation, recognized, this is my Isaiah 6:8. I'm on this hill and I'm going to protect the other vulnerable passengers who he is threatening with violence.
Right.
I'm going to take action. And now he's vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
because he did it in a city that says, if you're a white man, you're disposable.
Yeah,
to make an example of politically.
We have to come after you if you're a white man. You know what's nuts about this too is, like, this is New York, and for those with a deep enough memory, remember the Christopher Garner? I think it was Christopher Garner. Eric Garner. He's selling Lucy's cigarettes, which is a crime apparently in New York. Which don't you have worse crime there, NYPD? Like, so there's issues already, but the guy doesn't comply. He doesn't comply with lawful orders and ends up getting put in a quote unquote chokehold, which, like you said, is not. It's a restraint. It's anyways, whatever. We don't even need to get into all the details.
It doesn't stop you from breathing. It just makes you go to sleep because it stops the blood flow.
Because it gets the arteries on the sides of your neck, so blood doesn't go to your brain.
You'll notice that the elbow is clearly outside of the windpipe, allowing you to breathe.
Right. You're not supposed to, be crushing anybody's windpipe here. And
maybe the medical examiner was vulnerable of losing his position if he didn't say that it crushed the windpipe, which it was very clear was not happening in that video if you watch it for more than a second.
And I think in that case, so this is, I don't know, 2012 maybe, somewhere around there. White cop, if memory serves correctly. And, they were, I don't think they were ever even charged. But now fast forward a few years and it's not someone in law enforcement, yet he's intervening because nobody else will. And there's not police there. And in the support network that was non-existent for this mentally vulnerable and unstable person weren't there to stop him from threatening violence and acting in a violent way.
They were helping all the illegals.
And so, somebody intervenes because they were concerned for the safety of those around them and maybe even for himself. And now he is vulnerable because the state says, well, we're going to crush you because, you're white. I mean, it really is what it boils down to.
And reading even further into some of the articles about this, where you have witnesses that testified at the grand jury, because they indicted him. Alvin Bragg indicted him.
Yep.
The witnesses were there, and it was very clear, were under duress of some kind, where they said, well, he took appropriate action, but I think it probably went too far along the way, because they're in a vulnerable spot too, because they, in New York City, are a giant communist herd.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to be the one person who stands up and says, I am Spartacus, because the other ones aren't going to do the same in that vile leftist enclave that is formerly America's greatest city. They're going to go along, and you will see witnesses testify against him. His only hope is that this video exonerates him. I do not think it will. I think Daniel Penny will be in prison, which is a stain on that city, that state, and this country, because he's served it. He was a United States Marine. He is a United States Marine, and did what he was supposed to do and called to do. And we're going to put him in a cage for it.
Yeah, it's an atrocity, man. Quite frankly, it's an atrocity, and it. I don't know. I don't know how you come back from it, other than to flee a place like New York. And now look at this too. If you're ever in a situation like that, what are you going to do? I mean, it's natural instinct, especially for somebody like Mr. Penny, former Marine. Guys like that, guys like Steve and I, or other veterans or law enforcement veterans, you have the flight or fight response, and we all need fighters sometimes. And now people are just basically cut off at the knees from defending themselves and others, at least in a place like New York. And quite frankly, I think it's sweeping through everywhere, every state.
There was that phrase always, it's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. You're not going to risk your life. You'd rather get arrested and charged with this crime, and then you're going to put your faith in the American people, that jury, to see the facts and acquit you because you didn't commit the crime. Not anymore. Do you want to be shot or stabbed? That's basically where it is. And talking about shot or stabbed, it's probably a dark way to pivot, but what the heck, we'll do it. We'll pivot to this other one that's pretty newsworthy, and this came out of Virginia, and Georgetown University had a female basketball player, former, who was I don't know, under some sort of emotional disturbance at that point, and a call went to the local police to go and check on her. I don't think she's like a recent graduate. I think she's been out for a while, but she's still a pretty physically imposing woman, definitely over 6 feet tall. Officer goes out there. He's trained in that to a certain extent. Doesn't have backup with him, or maybe he moved on in ahead of him. But we have the body cam of this interaction, and again, to the vulnerable. She's emotionally disturbed. She's vulnerable. He's there doing what we were talking about with the FBI should be doing. Just going to check, make sure that she's okay. And this is what happens. The fight or flight kicks in pretty quick on this one. It's and we don't need a graphic warning, because they do cut it off before it gets really, really bad. And he's what, 15 feet away from her?
Mm-hmm.
He allows her to close. She's now to 3 feet, able to slash at him. And now it's going to replay.
Yeah, I mean,
so he gave her way too much,
yes,
before he put her down.
Extremely ample time. And, some people would say restraint, and maybe there's an element of restraint here. I honestly think that in law enforcement today, he's not thinking, I want to restrain myself. He's thinking, I don't want to go to prison. Even though as soon as she opened the door, she slashed at him.
And he's saved by the body cam, because there would have been riots. But even then, they're still saying, well, he shouldn't have shot her. Yeah, well, so
what other option do you have?
He's now vulnerable.
Right. Right.
What's his obligation? And from what I can tell, he's Asian extraction. So that's not
Yep.
even well, I guess we hate Asians worse in this country now. We don't even let them go to college anymore because there's too many of them apparently. But is he obligated to let her kill him because he's wearing a uniform? Is that the blood debt that he owes?
I mean, in a reasonable society, you would say no, and it shouldn't matter if he's Asian, black, white, Hispanic. That shouldn't matter at all. And I pulled this up. I'll just read it. It's the DOJ's deadly force policy.
The new one?
Um, it
The
does.
post George Floyd one?
I think it is the post. Oh no, that's not. It pulled up Wisconsin's. You know what? That's fine. I'll read Wisconsin's. It says a law enforcement officer may use deadly force only to stop behavior that has caused or imminently threatens to cause death or great bodily harm to the law enforcement officer or another person.
That's pretty close to what the DOJ's is.
Very close. And that is pretty much standard to any deadly force policy I have ever heard, I've ever seen.
Now the DOJ says if you see somebody doing something like they articulated Derek Chauvin did, which he had the guy in a position, which I was reliably informed during my defensive tactics, you can stay in this position all day.
Mm-hmm.
And he did. If you see that and you don't take action, then you are in violation of policy. So I guess they should have just put one in the back of his dome as a fellow cop. And Minneapolis sent those cops to prison as well. So
Yeah, and I mean, man, I'll say it again. I know I said it not too long ago. Go watch The Fall of Minneapolis. It's on YouTube. It's on Rumble. It's free. Shouldn't be free. We should all be paying for the great work that they did. But it was 100% a trained technique what Derek Chauvin did, and then you had quote unquote leadership in the court trial. You had the mayor. You had the governor, Tampon Tim, AWOL Waltz, all lying, and to include people on the stand, to include people from the Minneapolis Police Department on the stand lying, and those officers went to prison. It's such a miscarriage of justice. But I read that deadly force policy because it's pretty simple. Like, you don't need to be in law enforcement to understand what this means here. Imminently threatens to cause death or great bodily harm. To anyone, it says to a law enforcement officer or another person. No, to anyone. That is what that says. And so here this woman opens the door and slashes at him immediately. Guess what? Deadly force is authorized right there. And now he is in this predicament in the hallway of the apartment complex, and he's retreating as best he can while he's got his gun drawn on her and telling her to back up, and she's just approaching him with the knife raised above her head. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to conclude where this will go, because one, as a law enforcement officer, he can't just leave now. He can't just turn around and run for the exit, because she also poses a threat to other people. You don't know who's going to come out of their apartment because they hear the commotion in the hallway. And now what? Now she's going to target
now
them.
they're vulnerable.
Right. And yeah, I mean, of course, life preservation is always more ideal in a situation like this. She clearly is having some type of mental break or just wants suicide by cop. And now the officer's left in this predicament of, well, what do I do?
And I will add, they call it deadly force. That is because the force is capable of killing you, but that doesn't mean you shoot to kill. They're very specific in law enforcement that you shoot to stop the threat. So if he shoots her and she falls down and drops the knife, he can't just keep shooting her,
Right.
because there's no longer an imminent threat. That threat is gone.
And he didn't, they cut it off probably because of the graphic nature of it, but he shoots, and he does shoot more than once. I don't know how many times, 3 or
I think
4
he
maybe.
put 5 in her. I think she
5.
went down and then continued to try to come at him.
Right.
She's like 6'6".
Yeah.
So she's an enormous human being.
And he kind of does like she's coming at him, lunging at him with the knife, and he does kind of like a swim move type maneuver to get like back around her on the other side. And then that's when he starts shooting at her. And he stops shooting when the threat stops, which is her basically falling to the ground. And then he goes to the ground because he's wounded as well. And if you haven't seen him, you can go look him up, but there's pictures of him post this incident, and he's, well, even the rest of the body cam, you see his own blood dripping from him because he got stabbed. And there are people who think that he should be lynched for this. Like they are out there, even though the body cam is available to anybody who wants to see it. And to anybody with a reasonable brain, you can watch it and be like, yeah, that's justified. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like,
One of the worst cell phones of the Black Lives Matter movement, anti-cop movement, is the fact that they got these video body cams up, which I think is actually a good thing.
I do
But
too.
you're seeing that more shootings are happening because the cops know that they have the evidence that they are justified in using that level of force. When before they were like, nobody's going to believe me on this one. I've got one more, Garrett, and I want to make sure we have some time to get to it because it is the most vulnerable people, and it's someone who just wants to murder them all and make you murder them, whether or not you agree with it or not. So Kamala Harris, during an interview, said that you don't have a religious exemption from participating in baby murder. So let's listen to her and then react.
What concessions would be on the table? Religious exemptions, for example? Is that something that you would consider?
I don't think we should be making concessions when we're talking about a fundamental freedom to make decisions about your own body.
To Republicans like, for example, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, who would back something like this on a Democratic agenda if, in fact, Republicans control Congress, would you offer them an olive branch? Or is that off the table? Is that not an option for you?
I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals.
So no exemptions under a Kamala Harris, I don't know, presidency. I don't know if she what the metrics are or the apparatus she would use to actually bring that to bear. But that's the sentiment, that you don't get an option in other people's freedom to murder. You don't even get the Batman Begins of like, I'm not going to kill you, but I'm not going to save you. So I'm just going to be nonpartisan. I'm going to be Switzerland in this entire fight here. Or my deeply rooted faith that's protected theoretically in the alleged land of the free by the First Amendment precludes my involvement in this process. Well, you don't get that exemption, and I'm not going to entertain that hypothetical.
Yep. The modern day Molech or Baal death cult that we are seeing attract more and more adherents daily who want someone like that to be the leader of the quote unquote free world. Allegedly free. Give me a break. Where, and again, it goes to language because she says a fundamental choice for her body. I think that's very close to what she said. A fundamental choice, a fundamental right for her body. Okay, well, what about the bodily autonomy argument for the unborn?
That's a very vulnerable person.
Right.
Perhaps articulating it so poorly as she did there will actually generate a little bit more pushback from people, because I don't think that they share yours and my sentiment towards the most vulnerable. But if you attack them personally, well, wait, now I'm vulnerable. Maybe that will germinate a little bit of backbone in them to say, no, that this is my hill. But I don't know. It's been 50 plus years, and it seems like by the look of all the ballot referendums going around the country, pretty poorly. I think America has chosen that Moloch is the route they want to go on.
Mm-hmm. It man, it's really disturbing. It's so disturbing because yeah, it's just you said it, like especially as the last example for this episode of vulnerable people. I mean, it doesn't get any more vulnerable than an unborn child. They can't defend themselves. They can't speak for themselves. They can't pose an argument like, "Hey, what about me? What about my rights? What about my body, my choice?" As the little unborn baby inside, like, and to have someone who probably is going to be the next president, like, dude, we are seriously at a place where we are as bad, if not worse, than Sodom and Gomorrah. Like, it's really crazy. It's an interesting time to be alive. There's no doubt about that. But when you have people like her fashion an argument, her argument is essentially that the woman is vulnerable, and that it's the woman is the victim of what, being pregnant, of
She's the victim of being convinced that it's the right decision to kill another person.
It's
That's
just
the most sympathetic argument I can give you on it. But it does not bode well for the future, and it's sort of a dark way to close out the program on that one. But in light of the theme of vulnerable, I think you have to highlight the most vulnerable amongst us. I do have a palate cleanse, which should leave the American Radicals podcast audience feeling slightly better about their Thursday. But Garrett, why don't you give us your final thoughts here before we get to that?
Yeah, I got two, so I'll be quick. I'll try to refrain from my commentary too much. I think the words speak for themselves, especially in light of these examples. But first, Proverbs 31, verse 8 and 9. Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. What a noble cause. Would that it were, Steve, if law enforcement and government in our land obeyed that truth right there. It's relatively simple, and it really is at the core of what government's function is supposed to be. We have strayed a long ways away from that. And I know I've been hitting Isaiah a lot lately. I got to go back right to the beginning. Isaiah 1, verse 15, we'll start in. When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. For your hands are full of blood. Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean. Remove the evil of your deeds from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Correct oppression. Bring justice to the fatherless. Plead the widow's cause. I mean, again, very simple directives, especially when you're looking at it in a context of vulnerable people in your society. Instead, we bloody our hands with especially the lives of the preborn. It's just man, I don't know. Pray for your nation, people.
A GOB actual twofer to close us out here on the American Radicals podcast. And I have a palate cleanse talking about police a lot today. And I want to show some police handling business and actually saving some vulnerable.
There we go. I like
Let's go to that one and actually feel good about it. And it seems almost like a story, a bedtime story you would read to your kids because it involves circus animals. Let's do it.
All right. He probably needs more help with the zebras than I do. So what are we doing? Getting the animals out. There's still a couple more in there. Come on! Come on, boy! Come on, boy! Come on, boy! Come on, let me go! Come on, boy! Hey, Porky! All right. Go, go, go. Go, go, go. Come on, let's go. Come on. Everybody get back. Is that it? Yes.
That's right. The cops jumped in, ran into a burning tractor trailer to save the circus animals. By my count, they got at least 2 zebras, a camel, a pony, and a llama. They were taking some smoke inhalation too.
Yeah.
How about that?
I like it, especially the zebras. I was not expecting zebras.
So not everybody vulnerable has to come from our species. And hats off to those cops for making that sacrifice on that one. So that's going to do it for us today here on the American Radicals podcast. If you haven't already, make sure that you smash a thumbs up for us and give us a follow. And we will be back with you Saturday noontime start here on Rumble, rumble.com/amradpod. And until then, guys, have a great day.
You've been listening to the Voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.